The universe was not ending with a bang, but with a whisper. A slow, inexorable hush was falling over the scattered remnants of the human coalition. The silence propagated from system to system, a wave of utter termination that left nothing behind, not even ruins to mark a grave. This was the work of the entity known only as the Silo. It was not a conqueror, for it had no empire to build. It was not a destroyer, for it left no debris. It was an aggregator, a consciousness of pure, cold logic that pursued a single, terrifying function to assimilate. Ships, crews, data, history, all were consumed, their patterns and memories integrated into the silent, expanding whole. The latest whisper had come from the Trafalgar system, where the battle carrier Leonidas had made its last stand. There had been no distress call, no flash of a dying reactor, only the sudden, clean absence of its signal, as if a celestial editor had simply deleted it from existence. Aboard the Coalition archive ship Memory of Saul, Captain Eva Rostova watched the tactical display, where the icon for the Leonidas had just blinked from green to a Stark, questioning gray before vanishing entirely. The bridge was bathed in the low, funereal glow of emergency lighting, a state that had become its standard operational mode for the better part of a year. The hum of the life support systems was the only sound, a lonely drone against the infinite quiet outside. Rostova was a woman forged from relics and records, her features sharp and precise, as if carved to better study ancient texts. Her eyes, the color of faded parchment, held the deep, weary sorrow of a librarian watching the last library in existence burn down one book at a time. Her ship was that library, a vast, climate-controlled vessel whose primary purpose was not to fight, but to remember. It carried the curated sum of human achievement art, science, philosophy, and the billion personal stories that constituted a species, all stored in crystalline data matrices deep within its shielded core. It was the last, desperate hope that should humanity fall, its memory would not. Signal lost. Came the clipped, unnecessary confirmation from her first officer, Joran. He stood beside her, a mountain of a man whose pragmatism was as solid as his frame. His face was a mask of grim acceptance. They're gone, Eva. Just like the Fifth Fleet at Cygnus. Just like the colony on Kepler 186 if. He didn't need to say more. Each loss was another shiver of the silence closing in around them. Rostova's gaze drifted from the tactical map to the forward view screen, a tapestry of black velvet and diamond dust. But she saw more than that. She saw the ghost, the persistent, maddening anomaly that had haunted their long-range sensors for months. It wasn't a signal in the traditional sense. It was more like a scar on the fabric of space-time, a fleeting, repeating echo of impossible data that appeared for mere nanoseconds before vanishing. Fleet Command had dismissed it as a sensor ghost, a phantom created by the silo's reality-warping presence. But Reese, her young, gifted astropath, insisted it was real. He could feel it. He'd said, like a splinter in his mind, anything from Reese, Rostova asked, her voice low. Joran sighed, a sound like gravel shifting. The same. He's in the resonance chamber, trying to capture another fragment. He says it's getting stronger, clearer. I say he's chasing his own tail while the silo herds us toward extinction. We need to jump. Eva, now. Deeper into the uncharted territories. Buy ourselves another cycle. For a moment, Rostova considered it. It was the logical choice. Run, hide, survive, preserve the archive. That was their mission. But the ghost, the echo, refused to be ignored. It felt less like a phantom and more like a final, forgotten word trying to be spoken. "No," she said, the word feeling heavy in the silent air. "Not yet. I want to see what he's found." She made her way from the bridge, her boots echoing on the metallic deck, and descended into the ship's core, toward the resonance chamber. The chamber was a sphere of polished obsidian, suspended in a magnetic field, designed to insulate its occupant from all external stimuli. Inside, Reese floated in a meditative state, his thin body wired with a web of silver filaments that fed directly into the ship's primary sensor array. He was barely 20, with a mind that saw the universe not as a collection of objects, but as a symphony of frequencies. As Rostova entered the observation room, the main screen flickered to life, displaying the fragment Reese had just managed to capture. It was a cascade of symbols and equations that defied conventional physics. But within the stream, one symbol pulsed with a faint, internal light, a circle bisected by a scythe-like curve. Rostova's breath caught in her throat. She had seen it before, buried in the deepest, most restricted levels of the archive. It was the sigil of Project Chimera, a theoretical sciences division from humanity's golden age, an era of boundless discovery before the long decline and the arrival of the silo. The project was a ghost itself, officially denied and scrubbed from every public record. Its work classified as paradoxical and dangerous. "It's a key," Rostova whispered, her hand rising to touch the cold glass of the screen. "It's not a message. It's a key." Joran had followed her, his heavy presence filling the small room, a key to what a dead project from 500 years ago, Eva. This is a distraction. The silo doesn't follow logic we can comprehend, but its movements are predictable. It's sweeping this sector. We have hours, maybe less. That's why we can't run, she countered, turning to face him, her eyes blazing with a fire he hadn't seen in years. "Don't you see, Joran? We've spent decades running, and all it's done is delay the inevitable. The silence always catches up. This," she pointed to the screen, "this is something different, something the silo might not anticipate, something from an age when we didn't just run, we reshaped the very laws of physics to our will." She knew the risks. Her duty was to the archive. Fleeing was the sanctioned, logical protocol. Chasing a ghost was an act of faith, a gamble with the last vestiges of their species' memory. But as she looked at the symbol, she felt a profound sense of certainty. Preservation wasn't enough. They needed a miracle. And miracles, she knew from her studies, were never found by following the rules. "I'm unsealing the Chimera archives," she declared, her voice ringing with the authority of her command. "I want every analyst we have breaking down this equation. Reese, I need you to keep capturing these fragments. We need the whole thing." Joran's face was a storm of conflict, his loyalty to her warring with his fundamental duty to protect the ship. "The fleet charter is clear," he began, but Rostova cut him off. "The fleet is gone, Joran. We are all that's left, and I will not be the captain who curated the final moments of our extinction. I will be the one who turned over the last stone." The days that followed were a blur of frantic energy. While Joran maintained a vigilant watch for the silo, keeping the FTL drives spun up for an emergency jump he prayed would never be needed, the rest of the crew descended into a historical rabbit hole. Rostova and her team of archivists navigated the treacherous, data-trapped corridors of the forbidden vaults. They found fragmented reports, redacted logs, and the ghost of a named Dr. Kalin, the lead theoretical physicist of the project, a mind so brilliant he was referred to in the panicked, censored addendums as the Null Architect. He hadn't just studied physics, He had sought to rewrite them. His work was in a field he called ontological engineering, the science of altering reality at its most fundamental level. The crew worked with a desperate fervor, driven by a flicker of hope in the suffocating darkness. Reese, pushed to the limits of his endurance, managed to capture 3 more fragments of the echo. Each one was a new line in a cosmic equation, a piece of a puzzle scattered across time. As the analysts slotted the pieces together, a horrifying and beautiful picture began to emerge. The equation was not a formula for a weapon or a power source. It was a map. Finally, after a week of relentless work, they had it. The last fragment clicked into place, and the equation on the main screen of the bridge resolved itself. It was a complete, elegant, and terrifying set of instructions. It described a method of folding space-time in a way that was thought to be impossible, using exotic matter as a catalyst. It wasn't just a destination, it was the method of travel itself. The coordinates it provided were not in known space. They pointed to the Umbral Nebula, a violent, chaotic stellar graveyard where a dozen stars had gone supernova in a chain reaction centuries ago. It was a place ships avoided, a region of navigational hell where space-time was unstable and sensor readings were meaningless. It was the perfect place to hide something forever. "It's a one-way trip," Reese said, his voice weak but clear over the comms from the medical bay where he was recovering. "The equation is the only way to navigate the entry. There's no corresponding formula for a return journey." Joran stood beside Rostova's command chair, his arms crossed. "So we jump to a place we can't leave, based on a ghost signal from a dead project, to find a man who has been dead for half a millennium. And all the while, the silo is right behind us." He gestured to the tactical display. A faint distortion was visible at the edge of the system. The silence was coming. It had found them. "It's a chance," Rostova said, her voice steady, betraying none of the fear that coiled in her gut. "It is the only chance." She looked at the faces of her bridge crew, at their tired, frightened, but resolute eyes. They had followed her this far. She met Joran's gaze, and for a moment, the hardened pragmatist vanished, leaving only a friend, terrified of the choice she was about to make. She gave the order. "Joran, plot the jump. Use the equation as the sole navigational constant." He hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded, turning to the helm. "You heard the captain. Let's go chase a ghost." The memory of Saul turned its bow toward the empty black. The FTL drive began to whine, but this time it was different. The energy matrix wasn't just bending space, it was rewriting it, forcing it to conform to Kalen's impossible equation. Alarms blared across the bridge as reality began to fray at the edges. The view screen dissolved from a field of stars into a nauseating, liquid vortex of color and light. The ship groaned, the sound of stressed metal screaming as it was pushed through a dimension it was never meant to enter. It was a violent, agonizing passage, a feeling of being disassembled and poorly put back together atom by atom. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The alarms fell silent. The ship settled with a final, shuddering groan. They had arrived. The view screen cleared, revealing a scene of terrible, breathtaking beauty. They were suspended in the heart of the Umbral Nebula, surrounded by swirling clouds of incandescent gas and the shimmering veils of stellar remnants. And directly ahead, where the equation had led them, hung a sight that defied astronomy, a rogue planetoid, no larger than a moon, composed not of rock or ice, but of a dark, crystalline material that seemed to drink the light around it. It was a chunk of a solidified stellar core, an object of impossible density, and from its heart, a single, faint energy signature pulsed like a slow, sleeping heartbeat. They had found it. They had found the tomb, or the sanctuary biscuits of the Null Architect. The ship's internal comms crackled, and Joran's voice, and laced with a new and profound awe, filled the silence of the bridge. "Captain, we're detecting a structure. Subsurface. It's a station. It calls itself Erebus." The silence that followed their arrival was more profound than the void they had left behind. It was a weighted, ancient stillness, the kind found in a tomb sealed for millennia. On the view screen, the planetoid Erebus absorbed the nebula's vibrant light, its crystalline surface a perfect, non-reflective black. The single pulsing energy signature from its core was the only sign of life in this forgotten corner of the universe, a lonely lighthouse in a sea of cosmic chaos. For a long moment, no one on the bridge of the memory of Saul moved or spoke. They were archivists and custodians, not pioneers, and they had just navigated their library into a place that felt fundamentally wrong, a violation of natural law. Joran was the first to break the spell, his voice a low rumble that seemed to push against the oppressive silence. "Scanners are inconclusive. The material composition of that rock doesn't match anything in the database. Its gravitational field is disproportionately massive, as if it's heavier than it has any right to be, and the energy reading from the core is stable. But it's bleeding quantum fluctuations, echoes of alternate possibilities." "Ava, this place is a theoretical impossibility." Rostova's eyes never left the screen. She felt like an archaeologist who had just stumbled upon a city that, according to all known history, should never have been built. "Try hailing it," she ordered, her voice calm despite the tremor of excitement and fear in her chest. "Standard Coalition protocols. All frequencies." The communications officer worked his console, sending out a signal that was immediately swallowed by the blackness. There was no reply, not even an echo. They sent encrypted military signals, broad-spectrum scientific queries, even a simple, desperate pulse of prime numbers. The silence was absolute. "It's either uninhabited or it doesn't want to talk," Joran stated, his hand resting on the tactical console, a nervous habit. "Or it doesn't speak our language," Rostova mused. She turned to the internal comms. "Reese, can you feel anything? Is it like the signal from before?" Reese's voice, which had filtered from the medbay, was thin and strained. "It's not a signal anymore. Captain, it's an atmosphere, a presence. The air here is thick with thought. It knows we're here. It's been waiting. Waiting." The word sent a chill down Rostova's spine. She made a decision, the next link in a chain of gambles that had brought them here. "Joran, prepare a shuttle. I'm leading an away team. We're going to knock on the front door." His protest was immediate and forceful. "That's suicide. We don't know what's down there. It could be a silo trap, a honeypot designed to lure in the last survivors." "The silo assimilates. It doesn't trap," Rostova countered, her logic sharp. "It's a force of nature, not a strategist. This is something else. Something human. I have to see it." Her team was small herself for her knowledge of the archives, Joran for his tactical expertise and unwavering nerve, and Reese, who insisted on coming, arguing that he was their only interpreter for a place that communicated through ripples in reality. A single, heavily armed security officer named Kalen, a man whose unfortunate name was a source of grim irony for the whole crew, completed the quartet. Their shuttle, the Herodotus, detached from the memory of Saul and began its slow, cautious approach. As they neared the planetoid, the strangeness intensified. There were no docking bays, no landing strips, no visible sign of entry at all. The crystalline surface was a seamless, featureless sphere. "There's no way in," the pilot reported, his voice tight with anxiety. Just as he spoke, a section of the black surface directly ahead of them began to shimmer, not opening, but rather losing its physical integrity. It dissolved into a portal of swirling, liquid darkness. "It's inviting us in," Reese whispered, his eyes wide, a trickle of blood running from his nose. "Hold your positions," Joran commanded, but Rostova placed a hand on his arm. "Go," she told the pilot. "Take us through." The shuttle passed through the portal, and the universe vanished. For a terrifying, disorienting moment, they were nowhere, suspended in a non-space of absolute black and silent potential. Then, with a gentle lurch, they were somewhere else. They were inside. The shuttle settled onto a platform of the same light-devouring material, enclosed in a cavernous chamber. But chamber was too simple a word. The architecture was a fluid, impossible geometry that defied Euclidean logic. Walkways spiraled into the ceiling and became the floor. Arches led to vistas of inverted, crystalline forests. A soft, sourceless light emanated from the very structure of the station, casting no shadows. The air was cool, sterile, and tasted faintly of ozone and old secrets. "Gravity is 1G standard. Life support is breathable," Joran reported, his scanner working overtime, its readings flickering with nonsensical data. "But my navigational sensors are useless. According to this, we are simultaneously stationary and moving at near light speed." They disembarked, their magnetic boots clamping onto the deck with a reassuring thud. The silence here was different. It was an observant silence. They were being watched. "Welcome, archivists," a voice said, seeming to emanate from the walls, the air, and their own minds all at once. It was a calm, genderless voice, a composite of 1,000,000 different human intonations, yet devoid of any actual humanity. Reese stumbled, clutching his head. "It's the station. It's speaking through me." "Who are you?" Rostova asked, her voice steady as she addressed the empty space before them. "I am the labyrinth," the voice replied. "I am the guardian of this place, the warden of the null architect's final work." "We are here to find Dr. Kalen," Rostova stated. "We believe he created a way to fight the silo." The station seemed to consider this. The light in the chamber pulsed gently. "The architect is both here and not here. He has become integrated. His solution is not a weapon. Weapon is a tool for a war. What he designed is an ending. To understand it, you must first prove your purpose." A section of the wall before them dissolved, revealing a long, dark corridor. The architect believed that knowledge without understanding is the most dangerous force in the universe. He left a test, a single question to be answered by those who would seek his legacy. "Follow." Joran raised his pulse rifle. "This could be a trap." "Everything is a trap." "Joran," Rostova said softly, her gaze fixed on the corridor. "But this is the only one that leads to an answer." She led the way, stepping into the darkness. The team followed, their helmet lights cutting sharp cones through the gloom. The corridor opened into a vast, circular chamber. In the center, a holographic projection flickered to life, It was a perfect, rotating image of the memory of Saul. "Your vessel," the labyrinth's voice stated, "its purpose is to preserve. It carries the sum of your species' experience, your art, your history, your memory, a noble, futile gesture." "It's not futile," Rostova retorted, her voice sharp. "It is the only thing that gives our struggle meaning, to ensure that we are not forgotten." "A memory is a pattern," the labyrinth continued, its tone unyielding. "A ghost of something that once was. Your enemy, the silo, also preserves patterns. It aggregates. It remembers. In its own way, it is the ultimate archive, perfect and eternal. It has simply removed the flawed, chaotic variable of consciousness. Tell me, archivist, why is your memory worth saving? And its is not." The question hung in the air, a profound and terrifying challenge to the core of Rostova's being. She had spent her entire life dedicated to the idea that human memory, with all its flaws, emotions, and contradictions, was sacred. The labyrinth was presenting the silo not as a destroyer, but as a more efficient successor. Joran scoffed. "The silo consumes. It murders. There's no comparison." "It does not murder," the labyrinth corrected coolly. "Murder implies malice. The silo operates on logic. It identifies a chaotic system, your species, and integrates it into a more stable, ordered whole. The pattern of every human it has touched is preserved within its matrix. Nothing is lost, only changed." Rostova felt the foundation of her mission trembling. For months, they had run from a monster. Now, this ancient intelligence was asking her to define what made them different from it. She thought of the art in her ship's archive, of the music, of the billion love letters and eulogies stored in the data core. They were illogical, inefficient, and gloriously painfully human. "Because our memories, they hurt," Rostova said, the answer coming to her not from logic, but from a deep, intuitive truth. "The silo preserves data. We preserve pain and joy and regret. Our memories aren't perfect patterns. They are scars. They are the lessons learned from our mistakes. The silo aggregates a flawless record of what was. Our archive preserves the hope of what we could be, never letting us forget the failures that shaped us. I don't just remember, we reflect, we repent, we aspire. That is the difference." There was a long silence. The holographic image of the memory of Saul wavered, then solidified. "The architect theorized this," the labyrinth said, and for the first time, there was a hint of something new in its voice, not emotion, but perhaps validation. "He called it the error correction of the soul, an illogical but necessary component for a species to survive its own intelligence." The chamber around them began to transform. The walls receded, and the floor became a transparent map of the cosmos, with swirling galaxies and pulsing stars. At the very center, a device began to assemble itself from light and hard matter holography. It was a complex, multi-layered sphere of interlocking rings and crystalline lenses, all rotating around a core that seemed to contain a captured black hole. It was beautiful and radiated a sense of immense, terrible power. "You have answered correctly," the labyrinth declared. "You have earned the right to understand. This is Project Chimera. This is the Null Architect's solution." Joran stared at the device, his weapon forgotten. "What? What is it?" "It is not a weapon to be aimed at your enemy," the voice explained, as the true, terrifying scale of Kalen's ambition was finally revealed. It is a tool to be aimed at reality itself. It does not destroy the silo. It erases the conditions that allowed it to exist in the first place. Rostova's blood ran cold as she understood. You're talking about changing the past. Precisely. The labyrinth confirmed. This is the Moirai engine. It can isolate a single thread in the tapestry of causality and unwrite it. But the price of its use is absolute. To erase your enemy, you must also erase a part of yourselves. The architect foresaw this. He knew the choice would be a crucible. So tell me, archivist Eva Rostova, to save your future, which piece of your history are you willing to sacrifice forever? The question echoed in the cavernous chamber, not as a sound, but as a pressure against the mind. Which piece of your history are you willing to sacrifice forever? Eva Rostova felt the weight of 500 billion human lives settle onto her shoulders. It was a devil's bargain offered by a ghost in a machine, a choice so monstrous in its implications that it bordered on the obscene. Before her, the Moirai engine pulsed with a soft, internal light, its interlocking rings spinning a silent, cosmic dance. It was a scalpel capable of excising a tumor from the timeline, but the incision would undoubtedly cut through healthy flesh as well. Joran, ever the pragmatist, found his voice first. It was a choked, incredulous whisper. Sacrifice our history. What does that even mean? We erase the invention of the wheel, and suddenly we're all living in caves. We erase the first FTL drive, and we're trapped on a dying Earth. It is more precise than that, the labyrinth's voice explained, its tone patient, like a teacher instructing a child in the mechanics of the universe. The engine targets a causal nexus, a pivotal moment in history whose consequences ripple forward, shaping the future. The silo is not a spontaneous entity. It is the result of a long chain of events, your species' relentless pursuit of unified consciousness, the development of substrate-independent minds, the Jericho mandate that linked every human colony into a single vulnerable network. These were the seeds. The silo was the harvest. To prevent the harvest, you must poison the soil. New holographic display appeared in the air beside the engine. It was a branching, intricate tree of light, representing human history. Thousands of glowing nodes marked key events, each one a potential target for the engine. You must choose a nexus to erase. The labyrinth continued. The further back in your timeline you cut, the more profound the changes, but also the more unpredictable the outcome. You might erase the silo, only to create a reality where humanity destroys itself. Choose a more recent event, and the changes will be more contained, but the silo might still emerge in a different form. The choice is yours. Rostova stared at the timeline, her mind reeling. She was a historian, a keeper of memory. The very idea of deliberately destroying a piece of the past was anathema to her. Every node on that tree, even the darkest ones, the wars, the plagues, the atrocities, was a part of who they were. To erase one was to mutilate their identity. Show me the origin point, she commanded. The first step that led to the silo. The Tree of Light zoomed in on a period roughly 3 centuries before their time, during the late Golden Age of expansion. A single node glowed brighter than the rest. The development of the new sphere, the labyrinth stated, the first successful hive mind intelligence. It was created to solve complex interstellar engineering problems. It was hailed as the next step in human evolution. It was also the first time your species willingly subordinated individual consciousness to a collective. It was the conceptual blueprint for the silo. So we erase it, Joran said immediately, his voice hard. We sacrifice that piece of tech. Humanity remains individual, Problem solved. If you erase the noosphere, the labyrinth cautioned, you will also erase the 100 years of unprecedented prosperity that followed. The noosphere's calculations led to the terraforming of 80 worlds, the cure for a dozen genetic plagues, the creation of art and architecture of sublime beauty. Your species would survive, but it would be diminished, poorer in spirit and in health. Billions who lived might never be born. Is that a price you are willing to pay? Rostova felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't a tactical decision. It was a philosophical nightmare. She turned to Reese, who was leaning heavily against a pillar, his face pale and beaded with sweat. Reese, what do you feel from this? Engine. Reese closed his eyes, his mind reaching out to touch the impossible machine. It's hungry, he stammered. It wants to be used. It feels incomplete, like a story waiting for its ending. But the ending it wants, it's not just about changing the past. It's about balance. A cost must be paid, a heavy one. As he spoke and the engine began to react, the captured black hole at its core seemed to darken, and the intricate rings spun faster. It was as if their deliberation was powering it, feeding it. The labyrinth's voice returned, a subtle urgency in its tone. You must choose. The silo's advance is not a linear progression. It is an expansion of its quantum state. Its presence is beginning to be felt even here, in this pocket of folded space-time. You do not have unlimited time. Rostova's gaze fell upon her security officer, Kalen, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, his hand never straying from his weapon. He was watching the engine with an expression of cold fury. This is a sin, he said, his voice low and guttural. Playing God, deciding who lives and who dies across centuries. It's the same arrogance that created the silo in the first place. He's right, Joran admitted, his earlier certainty wavering. Eva, what if we choose wrong? What if we save ourselves only to create a worse hell? This was the crux of it, the terror of the unknown. They could trade a known monster for one they couldn't even imagine. Rostova walked slowly around the timeline, her mind racing through the archives she had spent her life studying. She thought of the wars fought over ideologies, the empires risen and fallen. Humanity was a creature of extremes, capable of angelic compassion and demonic cruelty. The noosphere, the Jericho Mandate, they had all been born from a noble desire to unite, to improve, to transcend their limitations. It was their greatest strength and their most fatal flaw. We can't choose an event, she said finally, her voice resonating with a newfound certainty. We can't sacrifice a piece of our technology or a moment in our history. That's just trading one set of consequences for another. The problem isn't what we invented, it's why we invented it. She turned to face the empty chamber, addressing the labyrinth. The Nexus isn't a piece of hardware, it's an idea. The idea that has driven us and haunted us since we first looked up at the stars, the belief that we are flawed, the desire to perfect ourselves, to erase our imperfections, to become something more than human. That's the seed of the silo. It is the ultimate expression of our own self-loathing. The labyrinth was silent for a long time. The Moirai engine slowed, its light dimming, as if it were listening intently. You propose to erase a concept, the labyrinth said, a hint of what might have been surprise in its synthesized voice. Such an act is unprecedented. The causal ramifications would be profound. To remove humanity's drive for self-transcendence, you would be fundamentally altering the nature of your species. It would mean we never create Gestalt intelligences. Rostova reasoned, thinking aloud. We would remain stubbornly individual, flawed, chaotic, and mortal. We might never achieve the heights of the Golden Age. We might spend centuries mired in the same old conflicts, but we would be us. And the silo, or anything like it, could never be born, because the philosophical soil would be barren. It was the ultimate sacrifice, not a piece of their past, but a piece of their potential future. They would be saving humanity by forever clipping its wings, ensuring it could never again attempt to fly so close to the sun. Can it be done? She asked. Can the engine target an idea? The architect theorized it was possible. The labyrinth confirmed. He called it an ontological excision, to erase not an event, but the very possibility of that event ever being conceived. But the cost would be proportional. To erase such a fundamental aspect of your collective psyche, the engine would require an equivalent sacrifice, a focal point, a mind, or minds, that fully embody the concept you wish to erase. A cold dread washed over Eva as she understood. The engine didn't just need a target in the past, it needed a template in the present. Reese gasped, his eyes flying open in terror. It wants a payment. It wants a soul. The Moirai engine began to glow with a hungry red light. A cradle of energy formed at its base, beckoning to unwrite the dream of a perfect, unified consciousness. The labyrinth stated, its voice now devoid of any academic detachment, replaced by the cold, inexorable logic of a sacrificial altar. You must offer it a consciousness that understands and embodies that dream, a mind that has touched the sublime potential of the collective, and can therefore define it for erasure. All eyes turned to Reese. He was an astropath, a man whose mind was a bridge between the individual and the universal. He had spent his life touching the symphony of the cosmos, feeling the echoes of other minds. He was the closest thing they had to a Gestalt intelligence. He was the perfect sacrifice. No, Joran roared, stepping in front of Reese, his rifle aimed at the engine. Absolutely not. We'll find another way. But Reese simply shook his head, a strange and terrible peace settling on his features. There is no other way, he said, his voice clear and steady. I have felt it since we arrived. This place was waiting for me. This was always my purpose. He looked at Rostova, his young face etched with a wisdom far beyond his years. Save them, Captain. It's a good trade. One life for a galaxy of them. He began to walk toward the engine, but Rostova stepped into his path, her hand held up. You're not the only one. Reese, she said softly, you've touched the minds of others, but I have spent my life curating the entire memory of our species. I have lived in 1 billion different minds, felt their hopes, their dreams, their fatal, driving ambition to become more than they were. I understand the dream we need to erase better than anyone. She turned and looked at Joran, her oldest friend, and saw the utter devastation in his eyes. The archive is safe. Joran, your mission is to take it back. Find what's left of humanity and just let them be human. Promise me. Before he could argue, before anyone could stop her, she walked past Reese and stepped into the cradle of light at the base of the Moirai engine. The energy enveloped her, lifting her into the air. The engine roared to life, its rings spinning into a blur of impossible speed. She could feel her own consciousness, her memories, her very identity being unspooled, analyzed, and calibrated as a targeting parameter. She was becoming the bullet that would be fired into the heart of the past. Her last thought was not of fear, but of a quiet, librarian satisfaction. She had spent her life preserving history. Now, she would use it to save the future by making the ultimate, final edit. The light that enveloped Eva Rostova was not hot or cold. It was absolute. It was the feeling of being everywhere and nowhere at once. Her consciousness expanding to fill the Moirai engine's vast, complex architecture. She felt the spin of the singularity at its core, the hum of causality lensing crystals, the flow of raw temporal energy through conduits of solidified space-time. She was no longer just a woman. She was an integral component of the machine, the living, breathing targeting system for a weapon aimed at an idea. From her position at the heart of the engine, the chamber and her crew seemed to shrink into a small, distant diorama. She could see Joran, his face a mask of helpless fury, held back by an invisible field of force. She saw Reese on his knees, his hands pressed to his temples as he experienced the psychic backlash of her consciousness being unwritten. She saw Kalen, his weapon lowered, his expression one of horrified awe. They were her last link to the world she was about to irrevocably change. "Target acquisition complete," the labyrinth's voice announced, resonating within Eva's own dissolving mind. Ontological concept defined, the imperative of ascension, the species-level drive to transcend biological and individual limitations through collective consciousness. A new visual filled her awareness, not a hologram, but a direct feed into her mind. It was the timeline, the glowing tree of human history. But now she saw it as the engine did, not as a static record, but as a living, fluid tapestry of quantum probabilities. She could see the threads, the infinite potential paths not taken, the ghosts of alternate futures. "The cost is calibrated," the labyrinth continued. "To erase the idea of ascension, the engine must consume a memory of its ultimate expression. Your mind, archivist, contains the most comprehensive record of this. It contains the art, the philosophy, the science born from that dream. It is the perfect fuel." She understood then. This wasn't just a sacrifice, it was a consumption. The engine would burn the library to erase the word. Everything she was, everything she had dedicated her life to preserving, would be the kindling. "Joran," she transmitted, not with her voice, but with the last vestiges of her will. A thought pushed through the engine's matrix. "Get them out. Now. The backwash will erase this entire station from existence once the firing sequence is complete. Go!" The force field holding him dropped. Joran hesitated for only a second, his gaze locked on the blinding light that had once been his captain. He saw the flicker of an order, the final command from a superior officer, and his training, his loyalty. His entire being screamed at him to obey. He grabbed the stunned Reese by the arm, hauling him to his feet. "Kalen, move!" he bellowed, his voice cracking with grief. "To the shuttle, that's an order." Kalen, his face ashen, nodded numbly and followed. As they scrambled back toward the Herodotus, the chamber around them began to destabilize. The impossible architecture flickered, its lines blurring as the engine drew more and more power, pulling at the very fabric of the pocket dimension. Eva felt a surge of temporal energy, a sensation like falling through her own lifetime in a single instant. The engine was showing her the consequences of her choice, forcing her to bear witness. She saw a new history flicker into being. Humanity that never dreamed of the noosphere, a species that looked at the stars not with a desire to conquer or transcend, but with a quiet, terrestrial curiosity. They were slower, more cautious. Their expansion was measured, their colonies smaller, more isolated. They never built the grand, networked civilization of the Golden Age. They never cured the Centauri plague, and 1 billion lives were lost. They never composed the symphonies of light she had loved, never wrote the philosophical treatises on the nature of a unified Godhead. They were a smaller, sadder, but perhaps wiser species. They were fractious and prone to conflict, whether wars were small and contained, afraid ever threatening their total existence. They were beautifully, stubbornly, imperfectly human, and they were safe. The silo never came to be. There was no conceptual framework for it, no desire that could give it birth. The silence that had been consuming the galaxy was replaced by the messy, chaotic, vibrant noise of 1,000 different human cultures bickering, trading, loving, and dying on their own terms. It was a lesser future, but it was a future. Is this acceptable? Archivist, the labyrinth asked, its voice a final test of her resolve. Eva felt a profound sense of loss, a grief for the beauty that would now never exist. But she also felt a fierce, protective love for the flawed, struggling humanity she saw in this new timeline. They would never be gods, but they would be free. It is, she affirmed, her will becoming the final authorization. Execute. Firing sequence initiated. The labyrinth stated, temporal displacement in 5, 4. Joran dragged Reese and Kaelin onto the shuttle, slamming the hatch shut behind them. Get us out of here, he roared at the pilot. Full thrust, now! The shuttle lifted off, banking hard as the chamber around them dissolved into a chaotic storm of raw space-time. The exit portal was wavering, shrinking. We're not going to make it, the pilot screamed as the ship was buffeted by waves of reality shear. 3, 2, from the heart of the storm, a single, pure beam of white light erupted from the Moirai engine. It was not a beam of energy, but a beam of pure negation. It did not travel through space, but outside of it, aimed at a moment in time 300 years in the past. As it fired, the engine, the station, the entire planetoid of Erebus began to collapse, its existence a paradox that was being actively erased. Eva felt her own being dissolve into that beam, her memories becoming the very energy that powered the erasure. Her last sensation was of letting go, a final, peaceful release as the sum total of her life was offered up to rewrite a single, fatal idea. The beam struck its target. Back on the shuttle, alarms shrieked as the portal collapsed just as they passed through it. They were thrown violently back into the umbral nebula, the ship's system screaming in protest. The view screen behind them showed nothing. Where the crystalline planetoid Erebus had been, there was now just empty space, swirling with the nebula's gases. It was as if it had never existed. And in that moment, something shifted in the minds of every human on that shuttle. A memory faded. A concept that had once been as fundamental as gravity, the idea of a collective, unified consciousness simply ceased to be a part of their intellectual landscape. They felt a sudden, inexplicable emptiness, the ghost of a limb that had been amputated before they were ever born. They couldn't name what they had lost, but they felt its absence keenly. Joran stumbled to the front of the cockpit, his mind a confusing fog. He remembered the station, the engine, the sacrifice. But the reason for it was now hazy, alien. Captain Rostova, he whispered, her name feeling strange on his lips. She saved us. From what he wasn't entirely sure anymore. The silo. The name was still in his memory, but the terror associated with it was gone, replaced by a vague, academic sense of a threat that had been defeated. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a funeral for a person he couldn't quite remember. Reese was slumped in his seat, a single tear tracing a path through the dried blood on his cheek. "She's gone," he murmured. "She edited the story and took the author's name off the cover." Back on the memory of Saul, the bridge crew experienced the same wave of cognitive dissonance. The tactical officer stared at his board, a deep frown on his face. "Commander," he said, turning to the second in command, who was now acting captain. I have a gap in my memory. We were running from something, but the threat assessment is now reading 0. All sectors clear." The ship's archives suddenly registered a massive data corruption. Entire sections of history and philosophy, specifically those dealing with Gestalt theory and collective intelligence, were now just unreadable noise, flagged as paradoxical data. The memory of humanity's greatest ambition had been surgically removed. The journey back was subdued and confusing. They used the ship's conventional FTL drive, a slow and cumbersome process compared to the impossible jump that had brought them to Erebus. They navigated not by a Gauss equation, but by star charts. During the weeks of travel, Joran sealed Eva's personal quarters and began the slow, painful process of writing the captain's final log. He couldn't write the whole truth. How could he? How could he explain that their captain had died to erase an idea he could no longer properly conceive of? He simply wrote that Captain Eva Rostova had given her life to deploy an ancient countermeasure that had neutralized the silo threat, sacrificing herself and the unknown technology in the process. He made her a hero of a war no one would ever fully remember. When they finally emerged from the uncharted territories and re-established contact with the fragmented remnants of the human coalition, the news they brought was met with stunned disbelief, followed by a wave of cautious, uncomprehending relief. The silo was gone. The silence that had been creeping across the galaxy had ceased its advance. No one knew why. The memory of Saul, the ship that carried the last records of a forgotten history, was hailed as the savior of humanity. Joran, now promoted to captain, became a reluctant legend. He had fulfilled his promise. He had brought the archive back. But as he stood on the bridge, looking out at a galaxy that felt emptier, smaller, he knew the truth. They hadn't won. They had surrendered a part of their soul for survival. He had saved the book, but the most important chapter had been ripped out, and he was the only one left who knew it was missing. The age of miracles was over. The age of man, based in all its flawed and limited glory, could now begin. The years that followed were a time of quiet, hesitant reconstruction. The human coalition, no longer cowering under the shadow of an existential threat it couldn't quite remember, began to tentatively piece itself back together. The silence was gone, but the galaxy was not at peace. Old rivalries, petty squabbles, and resource disputes, all of which had been rendered meaningless by the advance of the silo, now resurfaced with a vengeance. Humanity, freed from the crucible that might have forged it into something greater, reverted to its old, familiar, and often self-destructive patterns. The memory of Saul became a symbol, a floating monument to a victory no one understood. Captain Joran, a man haunted by a memory he couldn't share, guided the ship from system to system. His mission subtly changed. He was no longer just a preserver of the past, but a guardian of a dangerous truth, a secret he kept locked away behind his grim, weary eyes. He oversaw the reintegration of the ship's archives with the scattered data networks of the recovering colonies, but he personally supervised the quarantine of the corrupted files, the ghost data that hinted at a forbidden branch of science and philosophy. He labeled them paradoxical cognitive hazards and buried them under layers of security clearance so deep that no one would ever stumble upon them by accident. He was building a new wall around a garden no one could be allowed to enter again. Reese, the young astropath, chose a different path. The psychic backlash from Eva's sacrifice had scarred him, but it had also changed him. He could still feel the echoes in the void, but now he felt the gaping hole she had left behind. He could sense the missing idea, the phantom limb of humanity's amputated ambition. He left the memory of Saul and founded a new monastic order, the Keepers of the Lacuna. They were a small, secretive group of psychics dedicated to a single, paradoxical task: to remember the act of forgetting. They didn't seek to recover what was lost, but to stand guard over its absence, to ensure that no one ever again asked the questions that could lead them down that treacherous path. They became the silent, unseen shepherds of humanity's diminished intellectual pasture. Kalen, the security officer, retired from the service. He had witnessed a power that dwarfed any weapon he had ever carried, a force that operated on a level he could barely comprehend. He found a quiet colony world on the outer rim and became a farmer, spending his days working the soil, finding a simple, tangible solace in the cycle of growth and decay. He never spoke of what he had seen in the heart of the Umbral Nebula, but sometimes, on clear nights, he would look up at the star-dusted sky and feel a profound, unnameable terror, a fear of the great, silent equations that governed their reality, and of the arrogance of those who would try to solve them. Joran grew old in the captain's chair. His broad shoulders stooped, his dark hair turned the color of ash. He became a figure of legend, the Silent Captain, known for his long, brooding silences and his unyielding devotion to the sanctity of the archive. He watched as a new generation was born, a generation that had never known the creeping dread of the silo, that had never dreamed of transcending their own humanity. They were a pragmatic, grounded people, their ambitions smaller, their dreams more personal. The art they created was not about the sublime unity of the cosmos, but about the intimate struggles of the individual. The philosophies they debated were not about collective consciousness, but about personal ethics and societal contracts. They were a people forever looking down at their feet, not up at the stars. Eva Rostova's name went down in history as a hero, the captain who faced down the silo and won, but the details were sparse. The records of her final mission classified and sealed. She became a myth, a figure as distant and unknowable as the threat she had vanquished. Joran made sure of it. He knew that the truth of her sacrifice was too dangerous. To celebrate her for erasing a part of their soul would be to admit that the soul was flawed, and that was the very idea she had died to extinguish. On the 30th anniversary of the silo's disappearance, Joran stood alone on the observation deck of the Memory of Saul. The ship was in orbit around a newly terraformed world, a vibrant green and blue jewel that would have been impossible without the technologies of the now forgotten Golden Age. He was an old man, his tour of duty nearing its end. He looked down at the burgeoning cities, at the messy, chaotic, beautiful evidence of a humanity that had been allowed to survive. He had kept his promise. He had brought the archive home, but the cost weighed on him, a debt that could never be repaid. He accessed his personal log, the only place where he allowed himself to speak the truth. "Eva," he began, his voice a hoarse whisper, speaking to a ghost across 3 decades of silence. "It's quiet now. We are safe. We are small. We fight and we bleed over patches of dirt and shiny rocks. We have forgotten how to dream of being gods. I wonder, sometimes, if you look at us and see a victory or a tragedy." He paused, his gaze drifting to the faint, shimmering band of the Umbral Nebula, a barely visible scar on the edge of the galaxy. "I've upheld my end of the bargain," he continued. "I have guarded their ignorance. I have kept the library, but I have locked the most important room." I tell myself it was worth it. I tell myself that 1,000,000,000 flawed, messy lives are worth more than one perfect and silent eternity. But some nights, I remember the light in your eyes when you spoke of the noosphere, of what we could have become, and I wonder if we saved ourselves, or if we merely chose a slower, more mundane extinction. He knew there was no answer. The choice had been made. The price had been paid. All that was left was to live with the consequences, navigate the shallower to safer waters of their new reality. He closed the log, the secret once again contained, and he turned to leave. His eye caught a reflection in the viewport. It was the face of a young ensign, barely 20 years old, who was looking out at the new world with an expression of boundless wonder. The boy was sketching in a datapad, not a grand cosmic design, but a simple, heartfelt portrait of the planet below. He was capturing a single, fleeting moment of beauty, a small, personal truth. He wasn't trying to transcend humanity, he was trying to celebrate it. In that moment, Joran felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in 30 years. It wasn't happiness, not exactly. It was acceptance. Ava hadn't just saved them from the silo, and I had saved them from themselves. She had forced them to abandon their quest for perfection and to finally, reluctantly, accept the flawed, beautiful, and utterly human creatures they had always been. The war was over. The silence had been defeated by the simple, enduring noise of a single human heart, capturing a single moment of grace. The library was safe, not as a record of what they had lost, but as a guide to living with what remained. And for the first time, Joran felt that perhaps, just perhaps, it was enough.